Egypt's plan for a Qattara Canal to green the desert into agriculture. The Nile Delta in Egypt has been getting bigger since the 1980s. Long ago, it was a major source of food for the world, but now things have changed. Egypt has to buy a lot of food like maize, wheat, and vegetables from other countries because it doesn't grow enough on its own. This costs them about $15 billion every year. The problem is, there's not enough good land in Egypt to grow more food. Also, Egypt's population is increasing by about 2 million people every year. People are eating more, and cities are getting bigger faster than the country can handle. To deal with this, Egyptian leaders are thinking of big projects to make more farmland and new cities. They talk about turning deserts into farms, but is this really possible? Just saying it won't make it happen. They need a good plan to make it work, otherwise it's just wishful thinking. Egypt might seem big, but most of its land isn't suitable for living. Only about 3% of it is. Imagine a country as big as Belgium, but with 106 million people squeezed into it. Managing a country like that isn't easy. So, one idea has always been to make more land livable by turning desert into habitable areas. This would help spread out the population and take some pressure off the crowded cities. In 1997, Cairo tried its first big project to make this happen. President Mubarak started the Toshka project. The idea was huge: dig a 240-kilometer canal into the middle of Egypt's western desert. Then, bring water from Lake Nasser to fill the canal. After that, move a fifth of Egypt's population to this new area, which they hoped would become like a new delta. This was one of the biggest projects ever attempted, but making such a big change isn't easy. There are lots of challenges and risks involved, so while it's a big idea, turning it into reality is a lot harder. The Toshka project was a huge plan that aimed to solve Egypt's problems by creating new land and jobs. It was supposed to cost over $70 billion. To avoid paying for it all, Egypt asked private investors for help. The plan sounded great on paper. It promised to bring economic growth, reduce overcrowding, and create jobs. But it turned out to be a disaster. Problems started early on. The water in the area was too salty, and the machines used to work on the land kept getting stuck. Also, private investors didn't want to take the risk, so the project failed and people forgot about it. Now the current president, El-Sisi, wants to try again. He's updated the plan and set aside $400 million to start over. The new plan is to connect oases in the western desert, but there's a big problem. The lakes in Toshka dried up because Egypt stopped pumping water there. Restoring the water levels will be hard. Still, if it works, they hope to grow crops like wheat, corn, dates, and cotton on the new land. It's about the size of the West Bank and Gaza Strip put together. But this new Toshka project is just part of a bigger plan. Egypt's changed a lot since the first attempt. The population's grown a lot, from 64 million to 106 million people. That means more people to feed and less space for them. So, Egypt has other plans too. They're turning more desert into farmland in places like the Sinai Peninsula. They're spending $31 billion on over 400 projects there. They're also building new cities with everything people need, like schools and hospitals. The idea is to encourage millions of people to move there. In other parts of Egypt, they're building 100,000 greenhouses to grow food. This will help feed about 20 million people. It's the biggest greenhouse project in the Middle East, and it's needed because Egypt's population is expected to grow to 160 million by 2060. All these projects aim to solve three main problems: lack of farmland, too many people in cities, and spending too much money on importing food. So, Egypt is working hard to make big changes for its future. There's a plan to create a new area called the Nile Delta near the Nile Delta. It'll cost about $19 billion and cover around 4,100 square kilometers, which is about half the size of Cyprus. This big project will include new cities and places for industry with a focus on farming. They chose this spot because it's close to Egypt's roads, ports, airports, and factories. This will make it easy to move goods around the country quickly. The main goal of the new delta is to produce more food. Egypt spends a lot of money importing food every year. They hope this new area will increase food production by 30%, making Egypt more self-sufficient. But there are challenges. It'll cost a lot of money, and water's a big problem. Egypt gets most of its water from the Nile River, but Ethiopia's building a dam on the Nile, which could mean less water for Egypt. So they're looking at using treated wastewater or other sources of water for farming. What's interesting is that the Egyptian army is leading these projects. They're involved in almost every big project in Egypt. They don't just focus on defense, they also produce things, run businesses, and manage land. This helps them make extra money for their officers, who don't always get paid much. Some say the army controls up to 30% of Egypt's economy, maybe even more. The government, mostly controlled by the army, gives contracts to senior officers. This often leads to corruption because things aren't transparent, and the army doesn't always have good plans for the economy. They decide to build big projects without much thought, spending a lot of money. Sometimes these projects work, but many fail. Egypt's borrowing a lot of money for these projects, and the army keeps the money it gets, not sharing it with other parts of the government. The government says the army's involvement won't be more than 15%, but it's hard to trust them. Military officers control the main agency that checks how money's spent and investigates corruption. But the army is exempt from these checks, so we can't know for sure how much they're involved in these projects. That's all. Thanks for watching.